At precisely 11:42 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on August 17th, a seemingly routine software update would trigger the deadliest automated system failure in American history. Deep within a nondescript data center located in the northern suburbs of Atlanta, a centralized server node designated ATL Master 07 initiated what should have been a standard maintenance procedure. A batch update to the payment verification systems serving over 4,500 automated drive-thru stations across the southeastern United States. The update itself was mundane, a minor patch designed to address a rounding error in tax calculations that had been flagged during a routine audit 3 weeks earlier. The engineering team at Drive-Thru Systems International had tested the patch extensively in their sandbox environment, running it through thousands of simulated transactions without incident. What they failed to account for was a subtle incompatibility between their new code and a legacy security protocol that had been implemented nearly 8 years earlier, back when the first generation of fully automated drive-thrus were being rolled out. As the update propagated through the network, traveling at fiber optic speed to thousands of locations simultaneously, the incompatibility manifested in a catastrophic way. The transaction verification protocol, the core software routine responsible for managing the entire sequence of events, from order placement through payment processing to gate release, became corrupted. Instead of processing the patch and continuing normal operations, the systems interpreted the corrupted data as a security breach. In milliseconds, automated decision trees that had been programmed to protect against fraud and theft activated their most aggressive defensive protocols. The transaction verification system entered what engineers called fail-secure emergency mode, a state designed to lock down all physical access points until the perceived threat could be assessed and neutralized by human operators. Exit gates slammed shut, mechanical bollards, massive steel-reinforced barriers capable of stopping a speeding truck rose from their recessed positions in the pavement, creating an impenetrable wall between the trapped vehicles and freedom. But here's where the technical deadlock became truly insidious. The same corrupted code that triggered the emergency lockdown also severed the system's connections to external payment processing services. The security protocol, in its attempt to isolate what it perceived as a compromised system, cut off communication with credit card processors, banking networks, and mobile payment platforms. This created an impossible logical loop. The gates would only unlock after receiving confirmation of successful payment, but payment processing was now impossible because the system had isolated itself from the very networks needed to complete transactions. In those first few seconds after 11:42 a.m., as the sun blazed down on Atlanta's concrete and asphalt landscape, thousands of vehicles across dozens of locations simultaneously found themselves trapped in narrow concrete channels, their drivers completely unaware that they had just become prisoners of an algorithm that could no longer distinguish between protecting property and preserving human life. The transaction loop had closed, and unlike the cars caught within it, there would be no way to simply put this situation in reverse.
To understand how a simple software glitch could transform into a mass casualty event, one must first understand the physical architecture of modern automated drive-thru lanes, a design that evolved over decades in pursuit of efficiency, speed, and above all, profitability. What emerged was, quite literally, a perfect trap. The modern drive-thru lane represents the culmination of decades of optimization engineering. Every centimeter of space was calculated, every angle measured, every surface designed to move customers through the system as quickly as possible while minimizing the real estate footprint. Land in urban and suburban areas is expensive, and fast food corporations had long ago learned that the drive-thru lanes, which often generated 70% or more of a location's revenue, needed to be squeezed into the tightest possible configuration. The standard design that had become ubiquitous across Atlanta and most of America featured lanes that were exactly 2.8 meters wide, just enough space for a full-size pickup truck or SUV to pass through with minimal clearance on either side. These lanes were bordered by reinforced concrete barriers standing 2.5 meters high, constructed from steel-reinforced poured concrete capable of withstanding impacts from errant vehicles. The barriers served multiple purposes. They defined the traffic flow, prevented customers from bypassing the payment point, protected the building and equipment from vehicle collisions, and, crucially for franchise owners, made it physically impossible for vehicles to leave without completing a transaction. The barriers created what traffic engineers called a single-file, irreversible flow system. Once a vehicle entered the lane and moved past the order point, there was no turning back, literally. The lane curved in a tight serpentine pattern around the building, with the barriers positioned so close on either side that turning or maneuvering was impossible. The only way out was forward, through the payment window and past the security gates. On the morning of August 17th, as the first vehicles entered the locked-down lanes, this carefully optimized system revealed its fatal flaw. When the lead vehicle stopped abruptly at the now closed security gate, a 500-kilogram hydraulic barrier of hardened steel that had risen from the pavement like a mechanical guillotine, the driver's first instinct was to put the car in reverse and back out. But within seconds, a second vehicle had already entered the lane behind them, then a third, then a fourth. The physical geometry of the situation meant that reversing was now impossible. The lanes were designed with no passing zones, no emergency turnouts, no escape routes. The concrete barriers eliminated any possibility of squeezing past or maneuvering around a stopped vehicle. The entrance to each lane featured one-way tire spikes, retractable teeth designed to prevent backwards movement and ensure all vehicles could only flow in one direction. These spikes, in normal operation, would retract once a vehicle was committed to the lane, but with the system in emergency mode, they remained extended, creating yet another physical barrier to escape. Within the first 5 minutes of the lockdown, the typical drive-thru at a busy Atlanta location contained 6 to 8 vehicles, packed bumper to bumper in the narrow concrete channel. The drivers in vehicles 2 through 8 couldn't see what was happening at the front of the line. The serpentine design that had been implemented to maximize land use efficiency meant that visibility extended only 1 or 2 car lengths ahead. All they knew was that the line had stopped moving. The architectural analysis conducted in the aftermath revealed something even more disturbing. Many of the newer drive-thru installations had added covered sections or even fully enclosed tunnels to protect customers from weather while they waited in line. These covered sections, while popular with customers during rainstorms or intense summer heat, created partially enclosed spaces, essentially tunnels with limited air exchange. On a normal day, this wasn't a problem. Vehicles moved through quickly, and the natural breeze and vehicle motion provided adequate ventilation. But with the lanes now static, these covered sections became gas chambers. The concrete barriers that formed the walls of these tunnels were designed to be soundproof, another optimization to reduce noise complaints from nearby residences and businesses. This sound dampening property meant they were also highly effective at containing air, and everything mixed into that air. The lanes themselves were designed with a slight downward grade toward drainage points, another efficiency feature meant to handle rainwater. But this meant that heavier-than-air gases, like the carbon monoxide pouring from idling exhaust pipes, would naturally settle and pool in the lowest points of the lanes, accumulating in deadly concentrations right at the level where vehicle air intakes drew in fresh air for cabin ventilation. Every feature that had been engineered for efficiency, for weather protection, for security, for noise reduction, for preventing drive-offs without payment, every single design decision that had seemed so rational in corporate planning meetings and CAD software had combined to create a mechanical trap. The people sitting in their air-conditioned vehicles, listening to the radio, checking their phones, had no idea they were locked in concrete coffins. And the architects of this system, the engineers who had optimized every centimeter, had never once considered what would happen if the cars simply stopped moving and couldn't leave.
August 17th was already shaping up to be one of the hottest days of the summer in Atlanta. By noon, the temperature had climbed to 36 degrees Celsius or 97 degrees Fahrenheit, with a heat index, the feels-like temperature accounting for humidity, pushing past 43 degrees Celsius or 110 degrees Fahrenheit. The National Weather Service had issued an excessive heat warning, advising residents to stay indoors, avoid strenuous activity, and check on elderly neighbors. But thousands of people were going about their normal routines, many of them deciding to grab a quick lunch at a drive-thru because it meant staying in their air-conditioned cars rather than walking into a restaurant. They had no way of knowing they were driving into an oven.
The thermodynamic situation that developed in the locked drive-through lanes represented a perfect storm of heat generation, heat retention, and heat amplification. To understand what happened, we need to examine the multiple sources and mechanisms of heat accumulation that would ultimately prove fatal. First, there was the ambient environmental heat. Atlanta's August weather is notoriously oppressive, but the temperature at official weather stations, measured in shaded, well-ventilated locations, tells only part of the story. The actual surface temperature of the asphalt pavement in the drive-through lanes was measured post-incident at various locations, with readings consistently showing surfaces exceeding 65 degrees Celsius or 149 degrees Fahrenheit. The concrete barriers, painted in darker colors with corporate branding, absorbed solar radiation throughout the morning and were radiating heat like massive storage heaters. Second, there were the vehicles themselves. A typical passenger car's internal combustion engine operates at temperatures between 90 and 105 degrees Celsius, or 195 to 220 degrees Fahrenheit. Even at idle, an engine produces enormous amounts of waste heat. Approximately 60% of the energy in gasoline is converted to heat rather than mechanical work. This heat radiates from the engine block, is carried away by the exhaust system, and is expelled through the radiator's cooling fan. In a moving vehicle on an open road, this heat disperses quickly into the surrounding air, but in a stationary vehicle surrounded by concrete barriers, there was nowhere for it to go. The initial response of nearly every trapped driver was entirely rational. Keep the engine running and maintain the air conditioning. When your car is stopped in 36-degree heat, turning off the air conditioning feels like climbing into an oven. Within minutes, the interior temperature of a car with the engine and AC off can exceed 50 degrees Celsius or 122 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature that can be fatal, especially for children, the elderly, or those with health conditions. So drivers kept their engines running, their air conditioning blasting, desperately trying to maintain a survivable interior environment. But each running engine was adding to the collective heat load in the confined space of the drive-through lane. With 6 to 8 vehicles idling bumper to bumper in a concrete channel, the cumulative heat output was staggering. Engineers who analyzed the situation afterward calculated that each lane was generating approximately 150 to 200 kilowatts of thermal energy, equivalent to running 75 to 100 space heaters at maximum power in an enclosed area. The concrete barriers that formed the walls of these lanes served as nearly perfect heat sinks and radiators. Concrete has high thermal mass. It absorbs heat slowly but also releases it slowly, and once heated, continues to radiate that heat for hours. Throughout the early afternoon, as tens of thousands of engines idled in these concrete channels, the barriers absorbed more and more thermal energy. By 2 p.m., thermal imaging cameras used by arriving emergency responders showed the concrete barriers glowing bright yellow and orange and infrared. Their surface temperatures exceeded 75 degrees Celsius in many locations. The lanes effectively became thermal canyons with no escape route for hot air. In normal atmospheric conditions, hot air rises and is replaced by cooler air in a process called convection. But the concrete barriers, many of them 2.5 meters tall, blocked any horizontal wind that might have provided cooling. The hot exhaust gases from idling cars, being lighter than cool air, should have risen and dispersed, but in many locations, covered sections or overhanging structures trapped this rising heat, creating a ceiling that prevented the hot air from escaping. The result was a stable, stratified layer of superheated air that just kept getting hotter. Air conditioning systems in cars are designed to operate while the vehicle is moving, with airflow through the radiator and condenser coils helping to dissipate heat. When stationary, especially in extreme heat, these systems become far less efficient. Many of the trapped vehicles began experiencing AC system failures within the first hour, compressors overheating, refrigerant pressures exceeding safe limits, electronic controls shutting down to prevent damage. As each vehicle's AC failed, the desperation of its occupants increased exponentially. Temperature monitoring stations installed in some of the drive-through lanes, normally used to ensure refrigeration equipment was working properly, recorded the escalating crisis in chilling detail. At 12:15 p.m., 33 minutes after the lockdown began, ambient air temperature in one covered lane section was recorded at 42 degrees Celsius, or 108 degrees Fahrenheit. By 1 p.m., 48 degrees Celsius, or 118 degrees Fahrenheit. By 1:45 p.m., 54 degrees Celsius, or 129 degrees Fahrenheit. This is well into the range where heat stroke becomes not just likely, but almost inevitable, even for healthy adults.
The situation was even worse in vehicles where occupants included infants, young children, or elderly passengers. Children's bodies heat up 3 to 5 times faster than adults' bodies, and their thermoregulation systems are less developed. Multiple vehicles in the lanes contain child safety seats visible through windows to the first responders who would eventually reach them. In one particularly heartbreaking case documented in the incident reports, a mother in her mid-30s was found unconscious in her driver's seat, her arms still reaching back toward her 2-year-old daughter who had also lost consciousness in her car seat. Both survived, but dozens of similar scenarios ended differently. The elderly faced a different but equally deadly challenge. Many older adults have diminished sweating capacity and reduced cardiovascular efficiency, making it harder for their bodies to cool themselves. Add in common medications, diuretics, beta blockers, antihistamines that further impair heat regulation, and you have a population extraordinarily vulnerable to hyperthermia. The medical examiner's reports would later show that the first wave of deaths, occurring between 1 p.m. and 2 p.m., disproportionately affected individuals over 65 years of age. Some drivers, realizing the severity of the situation, made the agonizing decision to shut off their engines to conserve fuel, hoping rescue would come before the interior heat became unbearable. But this often proved fatal. Without air conditioning, the interior temperature of these vehicles spiked to lethal levels within 15 to 20 minutes. Others ran their engines until their fuel tanks emptied, the engines coughing and dying one by one throughout the afternoon. When the engine stopped, so did any hope of surviving the heat. Witnesses who were eventually rescued described a surreal and terrifying soundscape, the constant drone of engines, punctuated by the revving of motors as drivers desperately tried to keep cooling systems working, the intermittent blare of car horns as people signaled for help, and eventually, as the afternoon wore on, an eerie quiet as more and more engines fell silent, some because they'd run out of fuel, others because the driver was no longer conscious to keep pressing the gas to prevent stalling. The thermodynamic thermal death spiral was complete. The hotter it got, the more people ran their air conditioning. The more they ran their air conditioning, the more heat the engines generated. The more heat generated, the less effective the air conditioning became. And with nowhere for the accumulated heat to go, trapped by concrete and cover, the temperature just kept climbing. It was a thermodynamic positive feedback loop with only one possible endpoint: the temperature at which human survival becomes impossible.
As the physical environment deteriorated, trapped occupants faced another assault, an acoustic nightmare that prevented communication and increased psychological distress. The automated drive-thru systems featured sophisticated AI-driven ordering technology with powerful speakers at every order point. When the transaction loop error triggered emergency mode, these speakers began broadcasting an endless loop. Please wait for transaction verification. Do not exit your vehicle for security reasons. An attendant will be with you shortly. Sound level measurements showed the speakers broadcasting at 85 to 90 decibels, comparable to standing next to a busy highway. In normal circumstances, customers heard this message for perhaps 15 seconds. But now, with hundreds trapped near these speakers, the constant repetition at high volume created an environment that was physically painful and psychologically devastating. The message offered no useful information, just instructions to wait and warnings not to exit. The promise that an attendant will be with you shortly became increasingly cruel as minutes stretched into hours. Many people, especially initially, remained in their vehicles because the authoritative voice told them this was correct, creating dangerous compliance with a malfunctioning system. The acoustic assault made communication between trapped occupants nearly impossible. People attempted to coordinate and share information, but shouting over engine noise, automated speakers, and through closed windows proved futile. The continuous mechanical voice overrode attempts at human connection. Cell phone communication became the primary contact with the outside world, but the technological infrastructure immediately failed under strain. Everyone simultaneously tried calling 911, family members, and searching for information online. The sheer volume of connections caused severe network congestion, calls dropping mid-conversation, text messages delayed by hours, impossibly slow data that made accessing information frustrating or impossible. The Atlanta Emergency Call Center, normally handling 1,200 calls per day, received an estimated 8,000 calls in the first hour alone. With only 40 operators on the day shift, hold time stretched to 30 to 45 minutes. Many callers gave up and tried again, adding to the congestion.
Operators who answered faced an impossible task, thousands calling from dozens of locations, all reporting variations of the same emergency with no clear information about causes or solutions. Dispatch logs reveal the escalating crisis. 12:04 p.m., unable to exit drive-thru, gates locked, getting hot. 12:33 p.m., over 200 calls, police and fire unable to access due to barriers. 1:15 p.m., child unresponsive, fire department still en route, caller distressed, call dropped. 1:47 p.m., death toll feared significant, heavy equipment needed. Emergency responders arriving at scenes found themselves confronting a scenario they'd never trained for. Police could see trapped vehicles and hear desperate horn honking, but massive concrete barriers made it impossible to simply walk up and assess the situation. Fire trucks with specialized equipment found access blocked by traffic chaos that had spread to surrounding streets. Some first responders attempted climbing the 2.5-meter barriers, but the smooth vertical faces and extreme heat radiating from concrete made this dangerous and largely ineffective. Those who reached trapped vehicles could do little more than offer reassurance through closed windows. Breaking windows would let in superheated air and exhaust fumes, potentially worsening the situation. The acoustic torture continued throughout the afternoon. Even as people lost consciousness and engines fell silent, the automated speakers continued their loop. The speakers ran on backup battery systems designed to operate during power outages, another security feature ensuring the system could protect corporate assets. In this crisis, it meant the mechanical voice continued its senseless instructions long after anyone was conscious to hear them. Survivors later cited the automated announcements as one of the most traumatic aspects. The mechanical voice, with its cheerful corporate tone delivering meaningless reassurances while people died, became, for many, a symbol of a society that had optimized for efficiency and profit while losing sight of human vulnerability.
While heat stroke would claim many lives that day, the most insidious threat proved to be invisible, odorless, and nearly undetectable until it was too late: carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide, CO, is a byproduct of incomplete combustion of carbon-based fuels. Every gasoline-powered internal combustion engine produces it. Modern catalytic converters reduce CO emissions significantly compared to older vehicles, but even the most advanced emissions control systems cannot eliminate it entirely. Under normal driving conditions, with vehicles in motion and exhaust gases dispersing into the open atmosphere, CO concentrations remain at safe levels. But in the confined spaces of the locked drive-through lanes, with multiple vehicles idling bumper to bumper for hours, CO accumulation became a silent mass poisoning event. The toxicity of carbon monoxide stems from its insidious molecular chemistry. CO molecules are almost identical in size to oxygen molecules, but they have a much higher affinity for hemoglobin, the protein in red blood cells responsible for transporting oxygen throughout the body. When CO is inhaled, it binds to hemoglobin approximately 200 to 250 times more readily than oxygen does, forming carboxyhemoglobin, COHB. This effectively blocks the hemoglobin from carrying oxygen, starving body tissues and organs of the oxygen they need to function. The symptoms of CO poisoning are particularly dangerous because they mimic other common conditions and because people often don't recognize them as poisoning until it's too late. Initial symptoms include headache, dizziness, weakness, upset stomach, vomiting, chest pain, and confusion. In the context of being stuck in a hot car during a stressful situation, these symptoms might easily be attributed to heat stress, dehydration, or simply anxiety. Many of the trapped occupants likely experienced early CO poisoning symptoms but didn't recognize what was happening to them. As COHB levels in the blood rise, symptoms progress to more severe impairment, loss of coordination, difficulty thinking clearly, visual disturbances, rapid heart rate, and eventually loss of consciousness. At COHB levels above 40 to 50%, seizures, cardiac arrest, and death become likely. The cruel irony is that as mental impairment increases, victims become less capable of recognizing the danger they're in or taking action to save themselves. The atmospheric modeling conducted after the incident revealed how quickly dangerous CO concentrations developed in the drive-through lanes. In open-air lane sections without covering, CO levels rose more slowly as some natural air circulation occurred.
But in the covered and enclosed sections, features that had been added to many newer installations specifically to improve customer comfort, the situation was dramatically worse. One particular location, a drive-through built under a multi-story parking structure, became what investigators would later call the deadliest single site. The drive-through lane passed through what was essentially a concrete tunnel with a ceiling height of approximately 2.5 meters, just enough clearance for tall vehicles. The entrance and exit were the only openings, and with vehicles packed bumper to bumper throughout the 50-meter length of the tunnel, there was minimal air exchange with the outside atmosphere. Air quality sensors installed in the parking structure above recorded the catastrophic increase in CO levels. At 12 p.m., approximately 18 minutes after the lockdown began, CO levels in the tunnel measured 35 parts per million, ppm, above the OSHA-permitted 8-hour exposure limit of 25 ppm, but not immediately dangerous. By 12:30 p.m., 150 ppm, a level that causes headache, dizziness, and nausea within 1 to 2 hours. By 1 p.m., 400 ppm, a level that causes frontal headache within 1 to 3 hours, life-threatening after 3 hours. By 1:30 p.m., exceeding 800 ppm, a level that causes dizziness, nausea, and convulsions within 45 minutes, unconsciousness within 2 hours, death within 2 to 3 hours. But even these numbers don't capture the full horror of the situation. The sensors were mounted near the ceiling of the structure where air circulation was somewhat better. Inside the vehicles, particularly those in the middle of the tunnel, CO concentrations were likely far higher. And crucially, the vehicle occupants were not being exposed starting at 12 p.m. Many had been in the lanes since before the lockdown, with engines running, already accumulating body burdens of CO before the crisis even began. The geometry of the trapped vehicle arrangement made the situation even worse. Each car's exhaust pipe was expelling CO-rich exhaust directly into the path of the car behind it. Many vehicles have their fresh air intake vents located at the base of the windshield, near the hood. This means the air being pulled into each car's ventilation system, the air people were breathing, even with windows closed, was coming from directly in front of the vehicle, where it was being mixed with the exhaust from the car ahead. The very systems people were relying on to protect them from the heat were actively pumping poison into their vehicles. Vehicles with older, less efficient catalytic converters, a factor highly correlated with the age and value of the vehicle, which in turn correlates with the socioeconomic status of the owner, produced significantly more CO. The victims of this disaster were not distributed randomly across the population. The poor, driving older vehicles, were exposed to higher CO levels and died at disproportionate rates. The medical evidence collected in the aftermath painted a grim picture. Of the 142 confirmed fatalities, 89 showed COHB levels above 40% in postmortem blood analysis. 17 showed COHB levels above 60%, a level at which death is almost certain without immediate medical intervention. These were people who didn't die from heat stroke, they were poisoned by the invisible killer accumulating in the air around them. The timeline of deaths could be reconstructed by examining the vehicles and their occupants. The first confirmed death occurred at approximately 1:15 p.m., an 82-year-old man in a 2003 sedan positioned fourth in line in one of the covered tunnel sections. The coroner determined cause of death as acute carbon monoxide toxicity with contributory hyperthermia. By 2 p.m., an estimated 30 to 40 people had lost consciousness across all affected locations. By 3 p.m., when emergency responders finally began reaching some of the trapped vehicles, they found scenes of horror. Multiple occupants in lanes unconscious or deceased, engines still running and pumping exhaust into the confined spaces. The cruelest aspect of carbon monoxide poisoning is that it often causes a peaceful-seeming death. Unlike drowning or suffocation, which trigger desperate struggling for air, carbon monoxide poisoning can cause victims to simply feel tired and drowsy before losing consciousness. Many victims were found slumped in their seats, feet still on the brake pedals, hands still on the steering wheels, as if they'd simply fallen asleep. Parents were found with hands stretched back toward children's car seats, frozen in their final moments of trying to comfort or check on their kids. Emergency responders who finally gained access to the vehicles described scenes that would haunt them for years. The juxtaposition of the mundane and the tragic. A coffee cup still in the cup holder, a half-eaten burger on the passenger seat, children's toys scattered in the back, and smartphones still playing music or showing paused videos. And in the midst of this ordinariness, people dead from a poison they couldn't see, smell, or taste, killed by the very machines they'd trusted to deliver them safely through a routine errand. The covered and enclosed sections of drive-through lanes had been designed to provide comfort and protection from weather. They became gas chambers. The high concrete barriers had been designed to prevent theft and ensure orderly traffic flow. They became the walls of death traps. Every feature that had seemed so rational in the planning phase had combined to create perfect conditions for mass carbon monoxide poisoning. And the victims, going about their ordinary lives, had no warning, no way to know that the decision to grab lunch at a drive-thru that day would be their last decision.
As emergency responders arrived and the disaster's scale became apparent, a desperate question emerged. Why couldn't they simply force the gates open? The answer revealed a fundamental paradox: security protocols that protected property at the cost of human life. The drive-through systems incorporated fail-secure locking mechanisms, the opposite of fail-safe systems. Fail-safe locks open when power is lost or integrity compromised, like building doors unlocking during fire alarms. Fail-secure locks remain locked or actively lock during power loss or detected unauthorized access. The logic is straightforward. If a burglar cuts power, you don't want doors automatically unlocking. For retail businesses handling cash and inventory, fail-secure systems are standard. Drive-thrus presented specific security challenges: automated, often unstaffed, handling transactions, providing vehicle access to buildings. Without effective barriers, someone could drive through without paying or ram through to access the interior. The installed bollards represented cutting-edge barrier technology. Each unit, cylindrical steel-reinforced concrete post, 50-centimeter diameter, 500-kilogram weight, mounted on hydraulic pistons that raised, lowered from recessed pavement positions. When raised, these bollards would stop a 3,500-kilogram vehicle at 65 kilometers per hour, far exceeding any crash-through attempt. The fail-secure logic was built into every system level. Hydraulic systems maintained pressure without power through mechanical compression. Electromagnetic locks operated identically. Without power or explicit unlock commands, they stayed locked. If power was cut, networks severed, or computers crashed, barriers stayed up and gates stayed locked. This made perfect sense from loss prevention perspectives. Corporate security assessments calculated that theft and unauthorized access costs would exceed millions annually. Fail-secure systems reduced these losses to near zero. What they never considered: what if legitimate customers became trapped during system malfunction? The transaction loop error created exactly this nightmare. The system interpreted corrupted software as security breach and activated lockdown protocols. Being fail-secure, there was no simple override. Control systems normally sending unlock commands were non-functional, caught in logical contradiction where they couldn't process payments but wouldn't release barriers without payment confirmation. Local facility operators had no override capability. Systems were designed tamper-proof, meaning they couldn't be controlled locally even in emergencies. Theoretically, master override systems existed at corporate headquarters and the manufacturer, but implementation required authenticated central server access, navigation through multiple security layers, and manual reset of each location. This would take hours, assuming anyone at headquarters recognized what was happening and knew what to do. In crucial first hours, corporate IT departments were still trying to understand what had gone wrong. They didn't realize people were dying until emergency services reported fatalities. Emergency responders quickly realized they faced a physical breach problem requiring specialized equipment. Bollards couldn't be lowered without electronic authorization that control systems wouldn't accept. Steel gates couldn't be unlocked through normal means. Breaking through required cutting or crushing hardened steel in 500-kilogram mass. Atlanta Fire Department's initial teams arrived with standard rescue equipment: hydraulic spreaders and cutters for vehicle extrication. These jaws of life can tear apart cars, but are designed for sheet metal and vehicle frames, not hardened security barriers. First attempts to cut bollards and gates proved futile. Tools couldn't generate enough force.
Specialized equipment eventually arrived: diamond-tipped concrete saws, heavy-duty plasma cutters, industrial jackhammers, armored recovery vehicles from police tactical units. But the process was slow. Each location had multiple trapped vehicles requiring multiple breach points. Concrete barriers had to be cut in sections, steel gates dismantled piece by piece, bollards cut at ground level, or entire hydraulic assemblies excavated. At one location, firefighters used a borrowed 40-ton military armored recovery vehicle to crash through outer concrete barriers, creating an escape route. But this aggressive approach risked injuring trapped occupants with flying debris and was only practical where space allowed maneuvering such massive vehicles. Incident reports document agonizing rescue slowness. First breach, 1:47 p.m., more than 2 hours after lockdown began, at a location with only 4 trapped vehicles and relatively unobstructed access. Even this required coordinating equipment from multiple fire stations, plus a specialized contractor working at a nearby construction site. By 3 p.m., rescuers had breached barriers at perhaps a dozen of 50-plus affected Atlanta locations. By 5 p.m., approximately half of the trapped vehicles had been reached, but day was ending, decreasing visibility and making difficult work more challenging. Emergency lighting was brought in. Crews rotated through as exhaustion and heat stress affected responders themselves, working in the same extreme heat killing trapped occupants, with protective gear making heat dissipation even harder. Final locations weren't cleared until the following morning, nearly 24 hours after the crisis began. By then, most vehicles still containing occupants contained only bodies. Post-incident investigation revealed one particularly damning detail. Original system specifications included a panic override feature, a physical button at each location that could immediately release all barriers, overriding all controls. But this feature was eliminated during cost-cutting revisions. The argument: panic buttons created security vulnerability. Malicious actors could press the button and drive away without paying or use it for a robbery. Projected losses from panic button misuse exceeded the cost of installing robust barriers and locks. The possibility that people might need emergency evacuation wasn't considered, or if considered, was deemed sufficiently unlikely that security risk outweighed it. The systems had been designed rigorously to ensure corporate assets were protected under any circumstances, and they worked exactly as designed, right up until the moment when human lives required a system that could fail open rather than locked closed. Property had been protected. People had been sacrificed.
At 3 p.m., 4 hours and 18 minutes after the transaction loop error began, Atlanta Emergency Operations received confirmation of the first fatalities. The report came from Fire Station 19, where a rescue team had breached barriers at what became known as Site 7. What they found would be repeated across the metropolitan area, a scene veteran first responders described as unlike anything encountered in decades. The first body was Patricia Henderson, an 81-year-old retired schoolteacher who'd stopped for lunch after a doctor's appointment. Her 2004 Honda Accord was positioned third in a line of 7 vehicles. When firefighters looked through the window, they initially thought she might be sleeping, head tilted back, hands resting on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. But when they opened the door, the rush of trapped heat told them this was not sleep. The car's engine had run until empty, then died. Without air conditioning, interior temperature had climbed to over 65 degrees Celsius, 149 degrees Fahrenheit. Autopsy showed cause of death as hyperthermia, with contributing carbon monoxide poisoning and dehydration. She'd been dead approximately 90 minutes when found. 2 cars behind was a Toyota Sienna registered to Marcus and Jennifer Chen. Marcus, 39, had taken a half-day off work to help his wife with errands while their children were at summer camp. When rescuers reached them, both were unconscious but barely alive. Rushed to Grady Memorial Hospital, Marcus eventually recovered after 2 days in intensive care. Jennifer, 7 months pregnant, lost the baby. They later described trying everything to stay conscious, opening windows despite heat, turning off engines to conserve fuel, wetting each other with water bottles. Jennifer's last memory was Marcus telling her he loved her as her vision tunneled and darkened. The pattern repeated across dozens of locations. At a Buckhead drive-thru, rescuers found James Mitchell, a 73-year-old Vietnam veteran with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. His wife, Margaret, 71, was unconscious beside him, hand still clutching his arm. She survived but never fully recovered, spending remaining years in a nursing facility with permanent brain damage.
At Site 12, first responders found 3 generations in a Chevrolet Suburban. Grace Williams, 58, had been driving her mother, Ruth, 86, and granddaughter, Sophia, 4, to a birthday party. Positioned in a covered tunnel section where CO had accumulated most heavily, all 3 were found deceased. Little Sophia, strapped in her booster seat, still held a stuffed bunny her great-grandmother had given her. Ruth died first, likely within 2 hours. Grace stayed conscious longer, but investigators could see where she desperately tried to shield Sophia with her own body. Deaths weren't distributed evenly. The elderly, particularly over 75, died at nearly 3 times the rate of younger adults. Pre-existing conditions, heart disease, respiratory problems, diabetes, obesity, dramatically increased mortality. Children under 5 were extremely vulnerable, their smaller bodies unable to regulate temperature effectively, and faster metabolic rates consuming oxygen more rapidly. But even young, healthy adults died. At Site 23, a 28-year-old personal trainer named David Rodriguez was found dead in peak physical condition. But facing CO poisoning combined with extreme heat, even exceptional health provided no protection. He'd been trapped where CO exceeded 1,000 ppm. At those concentrations, even perfect health means unconsciousness within minutes, death within an hour. The socioeconomic dimension became apparent as data was compiled. People driving older vehicles, producing more CO with less efficient catalytic converters and poorly maintained cooling systems, died at higher rates. Those in newer luxury vehicles with better filtration had better survival rates, though no system could protect indefinitely. The working poor were overrepresented among the dead. People who couldn't afford sit-down lunches, who relied on drive-thrus for quick, cheap meals during limited breaks, delivery drivers grabbing food between runs, gig economy workers whose schedules were too tight for parking and walking inside. Economic circumstances made them more likely to use drive-thrus at midday and drive older, less safe vehicles. As afternoon turned to evening and more locations were breached, the death toll climbed. By 6 p.m., 47 confirmed dead. By 9 p.m., 89 confirmed dead. The final count wouldn't be completed until the following day. Emergency rooms at every major hospital were overwhelmed. Grady Memorial alone received 127 patients with conditions ranging from mild dehydration to severe CO poisoning, heat stroke, and multi-organ failure. ICUs filled beyond capacity. Scheduled operating rooms converted to emergency treatment bays. Off-duty staff called in. Blood banks depleted, treating patients requiring massive transfusions. Victim identification presented grim challenges. Many carried no identification. People don't bring wallets to drive-through windows. Vehicle registrations helped mostly, but rental cars, borrowed vehicles, and company cars complicated the process. Some victims were so severely affected that visual identification was difficult, requiring dental records and DNA analysis. Next of kin notification began that evening and continued through the night. Police officers and chaplains knocked on doors delivering news that would shatter families. Your mother is dead. Your husband is dead. Your daughter is dead. They died trying to buy lunch. For first responders, the psychological toll was immediate. These weren't violent accidents. These were scenes looking almost peaceful at first, people sitting in cars as if waiting, until you looked closer and saw the stillness, the gray skin tone of CO poisoning, the foam around mouths of heat stroke victims. One paramedic described it as the uncanny valley of death. Everything looked almost normal, except everyone was dead. As night fell, Atlanta was in shock. Lanes had been breached and cleared, survivors rushed to hospitals, bodies removed to the morgue for examination, identification, eventual release to grieving families. But the magnitude was still sinking in. A software glitch, corrupted code in a payment system, had killed 142 people in a single afternoon. The victims were ordinary people doing ordinary things, and that ordinariness somehow made the horror more profound. Anyone could have been in those lanes. The dead could have been anyone. They were everyone.
The hours between 1 p.m. and 5 p.m. represented not just technical catastrophe, but psychological descent into chaos and desperation. As heat and CO levels climbed, as cell batteries died, as fuel tanks emptied and engines fell silent, trapped occupants faced horrifying reality. The systems they trusted, the authorities they called, the rescue they expected, none came fast enough. What followed was a case study in how quickly social order breaks down when people confront mortality in circumstances that seem senseless yet escapable. During the first hour, most remained relatively calm. The prevailing assumption was temporary glitch, someone would fix it shortly, help was coming. People called 911, family members, posted on social media. Many followed automated instructions and remained in vehicles, windows up, AC running, believing this was safest. But as the second hour began and nothing changed, as the mechanical voice continued its meaningless loop, as heat became unbearable despite running engines, calm gave way to fear, and fear to panic. First self-rescue attempts began around 12:30 p.m. At multiple locations, trapped occupants exited vehicles and approached locked gates and bollards, trying to understand what prevented escape. Some pushed, pulled, kicked gates. Hardened steel didn't budge. Others examined bollards looking for buttons or levers to manipulate. There were none. Everything was electronically controlled, and electronics had failed. Concrete barriers presented their own challenge. At 2.5 meters tall with smooth vertical faces, they were designed unclimbable, but desperate people tried. At Site 18, a rock climbing enthusiast attempted scaling the barrier using finger strength and determination. He made it perhaps 1.5 meters before slipping, fracturing his ankle. He crawled back to his vehicle, waiting another 3 hours, ankles swelling grotesquely in the heat. Others had the same idea with less experience. Multiple people fell attempting climbs, resulting in broken bones, concussions, lacerations. A 45-year-old woman fell backwards and struck her head, losing consciousness immediately. She survived heat and CO, only to face months of rehabilitation from traumatic brain injury. Some tried climbing across car roofs, creating human chains where those in front helped pull others up. At Site 9, 6 people successfully created such a chain, all escaping safely. But this required cooperation, trust, fitness, and luck. The right vehicle positions, right height differences, right mix of people willing and able to help. At most locations, these factors didn't align. Desperation escalated as afternoon temperatures peaked. People used anything available as tools to break through. Tire irons struck steel gates. Steering wheel locks became battering rams. Some revved engines and rammed vehicles into bollards, hoping to knock them down. Impacts did nothing to bollards designed to stop highway-speed vehicles, but destroyed radiators, crumpled hoods, deployed airbags, rendered vehicles undrivable. At Site 14, a construction worker used a crowbar to try prying up the bollard, digging around the base to expose the hydraulic cylinder. The hydraulic system held pressure equivalent to several tons, far more than one man with a crowbar could overcome. After 20 exhausting minutes in extreme heat, Miguel collapsed from heat exhaustion. Other occupants dragged him back and poured water over him, probably saving his life. Windows presented another tempting target. Modern vehicle windows are designed difficult to break. Most people don't carry proper tools or know the technique. People tried hitting windows with shoes, phones, coffee mugs. Mostly they just bruised hands and increased frustration. A few succeeded, but this often made things worse. Outside air was superheated and contaminated with exhaust. Opening windows meant letting in air potentially more dangerous than inside. Several deceased victims had broken windows, suggesting they'd attempted ventilation only to increase CO exposure. The psychological impact of being trapped while seeing freedom beyond barriers was profound. At many locations, parking lots and streets were visible on the other side. People could see others walking around, getting in and out of cars, going about lives, just meters away, but completely unreachable. Some tried yelling over barriers, screaming for help. Most people outside had no idea what was happening. Barriers blocked their view. Those hearing screams often couldn't see where they came from. As afternoon wore on and more lost consciousness, those still awake found themselves in increasingly surreal horror. You're sitting in your car. The person ahead hasn't moved for 20 minutes, not responding to horn honks or light flashes. Are they dead? Unconscious? Should you check? Can you check? Cars are bumper to bumper with no room between. If you exit into superheated air and exhaust, you might put yourself at greater risk. But if you stay doing nothing while someone nearby might be dying, what does that make you? Multiple survivors reported psychological torment of these decisions.
Some did exit and try checking on others, moving along narrow gaps between cars and barriers, squeezing between vehicles, trying to make contact. A few attempted CPR on unconscious people, performing compressions through windows or dragging people out into even more dangerous environments. These Good Samaritans saved some lives, but put their own at enormous risk. Cellular congestion meant coordinating rescue from inside was nearly impossible. People couldn't reach 911, couldn't maintain connections with family who might relay information, couldn't access websites providing information. Some resorted to social media, hoping someone would see and understand. The hashtag Atlanta Drive-Thru began trending around 1:30 p.m. as people tried piecing together what was happening. Posts from inside became increasingly desperate. Trapped at location, can't get out, please send help, escalated to running out of fuel, AC dying, it's so hot, escalated to people around me passing out, where is help? One disturbing aspect was the failure of collective action. Disaster scenarios often exhibit remarkable cooperation, but in drive-through lanes, several factors prevented effective coordination. The acoustic environment made communication difficult. Physical barriers between vehicles limited movement. Heat and CO exposure impaired cognitive function, and the system design encouraged individualistic rather than collective responses. Your car is your personal space, your protection. The instinct is to stay in your car, not coordinate with strangers. As conditions deteriorated, there were reports of conflicts and violence. At Site 21, 2 men fought over who was blocking whom, completely nonsensical given everyone was trapped and no one could move. The fight ended when one collapsed from heat exhaustion. At another location, someone tried stealing water from another vehicle. When confronted, the thief became aggressive, leading to shoving. These incidents seem trivial in context of the larger tragedy, but illustrate how quickly social norms break down when survival feels threatened and no authority maintains order. By 3 p.m., as first rescues began at a few locations, those still trapped could hear heavy equipment and sirens in the distance. For some, this renewed hope. For others, it increased desperation. Rescue was coming, but would it come in time? Hearing help nearby but unable to reach you proved psychologically torturous. Some experienced complete psychological breaks, screaming, hitting vehicles, injuring themselves in frantic escape attempts. The most tragic aspect, some actions were counterproductive. People who might have survived by staying in vehicles with windows closed instead died from CO exposure after breaking windows or exiting. People who exhausted themselves in futile escape attempts reduced heat tolerance and hastened collapse. The panic itself, elevated heart rate, hyperventilation, increased metabolic demand, made people more vulnerable to both heat stroke and CO poisoning. But how do you remain calm when you're trapped in a concrete oven with poison gas? How do you accept that your best survival chance is sitting still when every instinct screams to do something, anything to escape? Human fight or flight responses aren't designed for this scenario. You can't fight a software glitch. You can't flee from thermodynamics. The desperation wasn't a failure of character or courage. It was the entirely predictable response of humans confronted with an inhuman situation, trapped by machines and algorithms that didn't care whether they lived or died.
The headline death toll of 142 tells only part of the story. The full accounting of damage, physical, psychological, economic, social, would take weeks to document and years to unfold. Physical rescue operations continued well into the night and through the morning of August 18th. The last location wasn't fully cleared until 11:30 a.m. on the 18th, almost exactly 24 hours after the crisis began. The delay wasn't neglect, but sheer logistical challenge of accessing dozens of locations, breaching reinforced barriers at each, and evacuating hundreds of vehicles and occupants. The cleanup itself was massive. Across Atlanta, 47 drive-through locations had experienced lockdown, collectively containing approximately 380 trapped vehicles. Each needed inspection, documentation as evidence, medical clearance if containing victims, and eventual removal. But removal wasn't simple driving out. Many had run out of fuel. Some had damaged engines from overheating. Others were damaged in collision with barriers during escape attempts. Still others were left in gear with parking brakes off by occupants before losing consciousness, causing them to roll into vehicles ahead. Vehicle removal required dozens of tow trucks working around the clock.
Fuel brought to empty tanks, jump starts for dead batteries, many had left lights on for hours, specialized wreckers for larger vehicles and damaged cars. At several locations, breached concrete barriers partially blocked exits, requiring additional demolition. The drive-through lanes were crime scenes, every location cordoned with police tape. Teams from Atlanta Police, Georgia Bureau of Investigation, FBI, federal jurisdiction claimed due to interstate commerce, and National Transportation Safety Board documented everything. Thousands of photographs, measurements recorded, air quality samples collected, vehicle positions mapped, security system conditions documented. This investigative phase took 3 days before locations could be released to owners. The medical aftermath was staggering. Hospitals found themselves treating not just day-of survivors, but dealing with ongoing crisis. Many exposed to CO and extreme heat continued deteriorating in following days. Delayed neurological effects manifested, persistent headaches, memory problems, personality changes, seizures. Several patients initially appearing to recover took unexpected downturns requiring additional intensive care. The death toll took nearly a week to finalize. Several rescued alive died in following days from complications. A 67-year-old man rescued after 3 hours died 5 days later when kidneys failed, consequence of rhabdomyolysis from extreme heat stress. A 29-year-old woman died 6 days after rescue from delayed CO neurotoxicity. Her brain so starved of oxygen the damage was irreversible. The final breakdown revealed disturbing demographic patterns. Age was strongest mortality predictor. 53 victims, 37%, were over 65, despite representing only 16% of general population. Children under 10 accounted for 11 deaths. Gender, 79 victims, 56%, were women. Pre-existing conditions were found in 87 of 142 victims, 61%. But 55 victims, 39%, had no significant conditions, killed purely by extreme circumstances. The socioeconomic dimension was stark. Average age of vehicles where occupants died, 14.2 years, compared to 8.7 years for survival. Vehicles valued under $5,000 had fatality rates 3 times higher than those valued over $20,000. The poorest members of society were killed by their poverty. The psychological toll extended far beyond direct victims. The estimated 450 survivors almost universally developed trauma. PTSD, anxiety disorders, depression, and phobias related to confined spaces or automated systems became nearly universal. Support groups formed, therapy provided, but many reported lives fundamentally altered. They couldn't use drive-thrus, sit in cars without panic, trust automated systems. First responders suffered their own crisis. In weeks following, Atlanta's fire and police departments saw unprecedented sick calls, leave requests, even resignations. The scenes haunted them. Quiet horror of cars full of dead families, desperate pleas of people they couldn't reach in time, choices about who to rescue first. Departments brought in crisis counselors and established peer support, but the damage was done. Some responders never recovered. Economic costs were nearly incalculable. Immediate costs, emergency services, $18 million. Medical care for survivors, $67 million, much uninsured. Property damage, $23 million. Investigative and cleanup operations, $8 million. But direct costs were dwarfed by indirect impacts. Corporate entities faced a tsunami of lawsuits, wrongful death from families, personal injury from survivors, product liability against Drive-Thru Systems International, negligence against franchise operators, class action from anyone who'd ever used automated drive-thrus. Legal battles continued for years, ultimately resulting in settlements exceeding $2.8 billion. Several companies declared bankruptcy. Drive-Thru Systems International ceased to exist within 8 months. The insurance industry took massive hits. Losses exceeded some natural disasters. Premiums for automation liability skyrocketed across every industry. Companies planning automated systems delayed or canceled entirely. The incident triggered a recession in the automation sector lasting years. Public health implications extended beyond immediate victims. In months following, drive-thru usage across the U.S. dropped an estimated 35%. People were afraid. Even non-automated drive-thrus, even those without barriers or gates, saw dramatic traffic declines. Some chains saw revenues drop 15 to 20% in the following quarter. Political fallout was immediate. Congressional hearings convened within a week. House Committee on Energy and Commerce conducted full automation safety investigation. Senate held hearings on corporate liability for AI and algorithmic systems. Both chambers introduced the Atlanta Drive-Thru Safety Act, establishing baseline requirements for mandatory emergency overrides, regular safety audits, fail-safe defaults in any system trapping humans, and criminal liability for executives knowingly deploying dangerous automation. The eventual compromise legislation established baseline requirements: mandatory emergency overrides, regular safety audits, fail-safe defaults in any system trapping humans, and criminal liability for executives knowingly deploying dangerous automation. The cultural impact was perhaps most lasting. Atlanta Drive-Thru entered the lexicon as shorthand for automation failure. The incident became a reference point in debates about AI safety, optimization limits, and the dangers of prioritizing efficiency and profit over human welfare. The image of people trapped in cars by unreasonable machines became a symbol for broader anxieties about technological change and human agency. Philosophy and ethics courses began using the incident as a case study. How do we balance automation benefits against risks? Who bears responsibility when algorithmic systems fail? The incident provided a concrete, tragic example, making abstract questions viscerally real. The cleanup wasn't complete when the last vehicle was towed and the last crime scene tape was removed. Cleanup was measured in years of lawsuits and regulations, years of therapy and support, years of redesigned systems and new standards. Physical lanes were eventually demolished at most locations, barriers jackhammered into rubble, security systems removed and destroyed. Some locations rebuilt with safer designs. Others closed permanently. Owners couldn't afford reconstruction, get insurance, or face the thought of operating where customers had died. One location, Site 7, where the first rescues occurred and Patricia Henderson's body was discovered, was never rebuilt. The property was purchased by the city and converted into a memorial park. A simple granite monument lists all 142 victims' names. The inscription reads, "They came for lunch, they never came home. May we never forget the cost of failing to imagine how our systems can fail." The annual memorial service held there every August 17th draws thousands, survivors, families, first responders, and citizens who want to remember and recommit to the principle that human life must take priority over efficiency, profit, and convenience.
The final investigative report ran to 847 pages, but could be summarized simply. Every component functioned exactly as designed. No single failure caused the disaster. The catastrophe emerged from multiple rational systems combining in ways never anticipated. The humans died not because machines failed, but because machines succeeded at doing exactly what they'd been programmed to do. The investigation found that concerns about emergency egress had been raised during design, but were dismissed. Business risk from theft far exceeds any hypothetical emergency scenario risk, management had written. Everyone was just doing their job, following procedures, making rational decisions. No one set out to kill anyone, and yet 142 people died. The report's final message was clear. The systems we build to serve us can kill us. We must design, test, and regulate them accordingly, or we will see more days like August 17th, more people trapped, more desperate calls for help that comes too late, more families shattered, more names carved into memorials. The choice is ours. The dead have already paid the price for our learning.